My parents recently told my younger brother, Logan, that he should take my house one day because, as they see it, I don't have a family to worry about. For context, I'm a single guy in my early 30s, and Logan, at 29, already has 4 kids. He became a dad at just 22, and from there, it was a rapid succession. His second child arrived a year later, the third 2 years after that, and the fourth was just born a couple of months ago. Logan's wife, Megan, and I don't get along at all. She has a way of pushing my buttons, acting superior and smug, and when I finally respond, she flips the script, turning into a professional victim. She can cry at the drop of a hat and put on such a convincing act that anyone watching is immediately on her side. My parents and Logan adore her, though they're fully aware of how manipulative she can be. They just don't care. I'll admit, she's attractive, hard not to notice. But her personality is so toxic that any appeal she might have is completely lost on me. Megan also refuses to get a job, despite having a college degree and the fact that my mom is more than willing to help with the kids all day. Logan is the sole breadwinner, and they rely entirely on his income, which means they can't afford to live anywhere but with my parents. Privacy is basically non-existent in their overcrowded 3-bedroom house, a place built in the 60s and clearly not designed for so many people under one roof. Growing up, Logan was obviously the favorite child. We're only 3 years apart, but he always acted like he was better than me, largely because my parents treated him like royalty. If I ever try to stand up for myself or push back against his antics, I get punished while he walked away scot-free. He got the lion's share of everything, attention, resources, you name it, unless someone outside the family pointed out the unfairness. That did happen occasionally, especially with extended family members who noticed the blatant favoritism. When people started calling my parents out, they decided to pack us up and move 150 miles away, effectively cutting ties with most of our relatives. From then on, we only saw family on holidays since the drive was about 3 hours each way. Logan's behavior growing up was nothing short of infuriating. He physically bullied me more than once, relentlessly flirted with my first girlfriend until she broke up with me, and openly laughed whenever I faced any kind of hardship. Anytime I expressed how hurt I was, my parents brushed it off, telling me to man up or stop being so sensitive. The only time I got anything close to equal treatment was when my parents wanted to look good in front of others. I still remember their forced smiles and fake generosity during birthdays or Christmas, as though pretending we were treated the same could erase years of obvious bias. Our nosy, gossip-loving relatives often caught on to what was happening, which only made my parents double down on their image management. They even threatened to take away my belongings if I dared to speak up about the favoritism. By the time I turned 18, my parents couldn't hide their relief that I was leaving. I wasn't even done with high school yet, but I moved out anyway. Couch surfing felt like a paradise compared to staying with them. After that, I went low contact. They didn't even bother to show up for my high school graduation, but honestly, I didn't care. From then on, I only saw them and Logan during the occasional holiday, just like everyone else in the extended family. The pandemic in 2020 hit me hard. I lost my job and couldn't renew the lease on my condo because my roommate lost his job too. Neither of us could afford to keep the place on unemployment alone. That condo, a 2-bedroom rental I absolutely loved, had been a taste of the life I wanted, but I couldn't sustain it. My roommate moved back in with his family, and I had no choice but to sell nearly everything I owned. I needed to downsize drastically or risk becoming homeless. Looking back, I realized I made a mistake by renting a place that was too expensive for my income. I liked the high life, and for a while it worked, but when everything fell apart, I learned the hard way that I should have been living within my means and saving more for emergencies. Still, I came up with a plan. I owned a truck, a purchase I'd made simply because I love trucks, and I found a camper for $1,000 that was in decent shape. I figured I could attach it to my truck and live out of it temporarily. What I thought would be a short-term solution turned into something much longer than I ever expected. Initially, I hoped my parents would let me park the camper at their place. Logan and Megan still live there with their kids, so I thought they might make room for me too. But when I asked, my parents flatly refused. They claimed the house was already too crowded and reminded me that we hadn't gotten along in years. They said the only way they'd let me park the camper there was if I paid them rent equivalent to a local apartment. which was completely unreasonable given my jobless state. Their audacity was mind-blowing. I was unemployed and trying to save every cent of my unemployment benefits, but they wanted me to pay a premium just to park my camper in their driveway. They even called my camper an eyesore and laughed about my situation. Logan and Megan joined in, mocking me as a homeless bum. Left with no options, I parked my camper in a store parking lot that first night, scared out of my mind that someone might try to break in. I barely slept. The reality of my situation sank in quickly. I had no close relatives nearby who could help, as most lived far away. My friends all rented apartments, and I didn't want to impose on them. Plus, I was attached to my area and didn't want to leave. I forwarded my mail to a friend's apartment so I could at least keep some semblance of normalcy, but finding a stable place to park and sleep was a daily struggle. Desperation set in as I started searching for work. I focused on finding something similar to my old job, but the pandemic made everything harder. For months, I lived this nomadic life, facing one challenge after another. Living out of the camper came with its own set of challenges, and not all of them were easy to navigate. From dealing with beggars and people using drugs nearby, to strangers demanding that I leave because my camper was an eyesore, it felt like a constant battle to find peace. Once, a man claiming to represent an HOA confronted me. I wasn't even parked on a residential street, so I questioned his authority. That only made him angry, and he started yelling threats at me. Rather than risk an escalation, I packed up and moved my camper again, though it left a sour taste in my mouth. Electricity was another issue. To keep my camper batteries charged, I had to get creative. I used a long extension cord to discreetly plug into random outdoor outlets on buildings while parked nearby. I know it wasn't the most ethical solution, but I needed power to keep my tiny fridge running. Without it, I'd have no way to store food. I relied on a small solar power bank to charge my phone, but I didn't have a generator. Those are noisy, expensive, and require fuel, something I couldn't afford. So, I made do with what I had. Months passed in this makeshift, nomadic lifestyle before I finally managed to land a new job. I had to move to a nearby city to find something suitable that didn't involve retail. I'd worked retail during college and had sworn I'd never go back, though I was getting desperate enough to consider breaking that promise. Even while receiving unemployment benefits, I felt aimless. I had no stable place to live, and I didn't want to wait until the money ran out to start working again. Plus, I was bored out of my mind. Most of my days were spent reading, watching DVDs on a tiny portable player, or mapping out which public bathrooms I could use. Honestly, I envied countries like Japan, where public bathhouses are common. We could really use something like that here. When I finally secured a job, it felt like a light at the end of a very long tunnel. The position wasn't glamorous, but it gave me stability. I parked my camper in the employee lot, way in the back where no one ever parked. The area was so forgotten that even the security guards barely patrolled it. My boss, who also owned the company, found the arrangement amusing and had no problem with it. In fact, he appreciated that I was available to take on extra shifts whenever needed, as long as I had enough rest. He even allowed me to detach the camper from my truck and set it up in one of the parking spots so I could use my truck freely. I'm not sure if this setup was entirely legal, but no one ever complained. Security kept an eye out for trespassers, and I was left alone for the most part. I became something of an on-call employee, working nearly every day and picking up whatever hours were available. My boss even let me connect the camper to the building's electricity and water. In exchange, I worked for free on Sundays when the office was closed, apart from the janitor and security staff. It wasn't an ideal living situation, but it worked. I used a friend's apartment or my gym for showers, since my camper only had a portable toilet that I avoided using as much as possible. Emptying it was a chore I wouldn't wish on anyone. Over time, I became friendly with the night security guard, who turned out to be a great guy. He's now one of my closest friends. Living in the camper wasn't without its challenges, though. Winter was manageable with a small electric heater, but summers were brutal. The camper had no air conditioning, so I bought a secondhand portable unit to survive the heat. Despite the discomfort, I managed to save money, learn new skills from my coworkers, and make significant progress at my job. By mid-2021, My hard work paid off when I was promoted to a supervisor position with a much better salary. That's when I decided it was time to put down roots. Losing my condo had been a wake-up call. I needed a stable, long-term home. I searched for something close to work and eventually found a 3-bedroom manufactured home just 2 miles away. It was on a small lot and a little older, but it was perfect for my needs. I even managed to negotiate $10,000 off the asking price. Using almost all of my savings for the down payment, I secured a loan and became a homeowner. Finally, I was free from the camper. I moved in and parked the camper in my backyard, detaching it from the truck. It now serves as a backup space or storage, just in case I ever need it again. It felt incredible to have a home of my own, with enough room to breathe and dream again. But in my excitement, I made a mistake. I brag about my new house on social media. That post was the catalyst for everything that followed. A few weeks later, my parents, Logan, and Megan showed up at my house unannounced. I hadn't even given them my address, so how they found me is still a mystery. None of my friends admitted to sharing my location, and no other family members had visited me before. To this day, I suspect they might have followed me home from work. It wouldn't surprise me. When I opened the door, they pushed their way inside like a herd of tourists on vacation. Logan and Megan were grinning ear to ear, and Megan flashed me this unsettling, smug smile that only made sense later when I pieced everything together. They wandered through my home, poking around and commenting on everything. My parents kept talking about how much space I had and how unnecessary it was for someone like me, a single guy with no family, to have such a large house. Logan, meanwhile, kept pointing out that my house was closer to his job than my parents' place. The red flags were everywhere. Eventually, Logan asked to speak with me privately. Everyone else immediately left the room and gathered on the front porch, which only confirmed my suspicions. They had planned something. Logan, with that same arrogant tone he's always had, told me the house was too much for me alone. He suggested that I let him and his family move in, as Megan was pregnant with their 4th child. His plan? I could live in a camper outside while they took over the main house. To top it off, Logan didn't even mention paying rent. He has a good job, but that didn't seem to factor into his grand scheme. He even started talking about making necessary changes, like setting curfews and requiring me to give notice before entering my own house. It was absurd. If it hadn't been my brother saying these things, I might have thought the person in front of me was completely delusional. Then again, Logan had long since lost touch with reality, thanks to our parents treating him like the center of the universe. Every time I tried to speak, Logan interrupted, talking over me like my opinion didn't matter. There was no way I was going to let him or Megan move into my house. I might consider renting a room to someone else to help with the mortgage, but never to them. I've seen enough stories online about situations like this, and I never thought I'd be living one myself. But Logan and my parents? They fit the mold perfectly. Dealing with entitled people is exhausting, but my family managed to take it to a whole new level. When my brother Logan started spouting off about why he deserved my house, I decided to quietly start recording on my phone. I held the device in my lap, making sure to capture everything. Logan didn't even notice. He was too busy waving his arms around and listing all the reasons I should hand over my house. At one point, he even stuck out his hand like we were finalizing some sort of deal. That's when I snapped. With a loud and firm hell no, I made it clear that wasn't happening. My tone was so forceful that Logan actually stumbled back for a moment. See, I rarely raised my voice around him growing up, mostly because I get punished for it by our parents. But this was my house, not theirs, and I wasn't about to let him or anyone else push me around here. Standing up, I looked Logan in the eye and told him straight that my home was not up for grabs. No amount of pretending it was already decided would change that. I reminded him that I bought this house for myself, and it wasn't my fault he kept having kids he couldn't afford. If he was stuck living with our parents, that was his problem, not mine. Logan stepped closer, getting so uncomfortably near that he was almost in my face. He snarled that I didn't deserve the house and claimed his family needed it more. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. That's complete nonsense, I said. I worked my ass off to afford this house, and I absolutely deserve it. Logan's response was as ridiculous as you'd expect. He He shouted that I didn't need all the space because I didn't have a wife or kids. Therefore, according to him, I might as well hand it over to him. I shot back that I wasn't giving him a thing, especially since he hadn't even offered to pay rent. You want me to cover the entire mortgage while you live here for free? Get real. I told him. Then he had the audacity to say he shouldn't have to pay rent because family comes first, and besides, our parents said I was going to let him move in. He actually thought their word was law. I was livid. They have no right to give you my house, Logan. This is mine, not theirs, I said. At that point, my parents barged in through the front door, as if on cue. They surrounded me, all of them talking over each other and trying to pressure me into agreeing. I lost count of how many times I heard the phrase, just do it for Logan. Megan, Logan's wife, was the loudest, screeching about how I couldn't deny them because she was pregnant again. I told her flat out that her being pregnant wasn't my responsibility. She just assumed I'd roll over and let her take whatever she wanted. I owe you nothing, I said. You've never shown me a shred of respect, and I have zero sympathy for you. That must have struck a nerve because Megan lunged at me, landing a slap across my face before Logan held her back. She kicked and screamed, demanding to be let go so she could scratch my eyes out. Meanwhile, I held up my phone, letting them know I'd been recording everything. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police, I warned. My parents finally told Logan and Megan to leave, but not without a parting shot. My mom, as dramatic as ever, declared that I had 1 week to come to my senses. I told her not to bother coming back because my decision was final. On her way out, Megan screamed, sobbing theatrically in her hands, while my mom muttered that I better do this for Logan and Megan. I slammed the door behind them. After they left, I immediately took to social media to tell the whole family what had happened. I knew my parents and Logan would try to twist the story to make me the villain, so I wanted to get ahead of them. Sure enough, my preemptive post worked. While some relatives sided with my parents and Logan, most saw through their nonsense. The video I had helped sway things in my favor. Still, I got a call from someone I didn't even know, ranting about how I was a terrible brother for not making way for a real family man. I hung up and blocked the number. The week passed, and just as promised, my parents showed up again with Logan in tow. They rang my doorbell repeatedly and pounded on the door like it was a police raid. When I finally answered, they tried to shove their way inside, but I had installed latch chains to keep them out. I also braced my body against the door, refusing to let them in. Logan and my dad demanded I open up, but I told them I was recording everything and would call the cops if they didn't back off. My mom tried a different approach, putting on her sickly sweet voice and asking if I was ready to let Logan move in. I told her, and the rest of them, to get lost. She then burst into fake tears, asking why I couldn't just do this for Logan because he was my beloved brother. That made me laugh. Beloved brother? I said, I don't love him. He's treated me like garbage for years, and you've enabled him every step of the way. You're terrible parents, and he's a terrible brother. I told them to leave before I called the police, and to my surprise, they actually left. My mom cried dramatically all the way to the car, and the others shot me dirty looks as they followed her. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. When I came home the following Friday, I found a moving truck and Logan's minivan parked in my driveway. Logan and Megan were unloading boxes, acting as though they owned the place. Logan had the nerve to wave at me with a smug grin. Megan, in her most condescending tone, told me it was okay because my mommy allowed it and I should always listen to mommy. Boiling with rage, I locked myself in my truck and called the police. Megan pounded on my window, yelling at me to stop and crying that I couldn't do this to Dan. When I ignored her, she threatened to key my truck. The 911 operator heard everything, as I'd left the window slightly open. I warned Megan that if she touched my truck, I'd sue her. That shut her up, but not for long. When the cops arrived, Logan and Megan had locked themselves inside my house. I explained the situation, showed the officers my ID with the address, and pointed out the broken lock on my front door. The drill they'd used to break in was still lying on the porch, along with the old lock they destroyed. It didn't take long for my parents to show up, spinning some ridiculous lie about how I'd agreed to rent the house to Logan. I called them out immediately, saying it was an easily disproven lie. That's when Logan and Megan came outside with papers they'd clearly just printed. They had forged a rental agreement, complete with a fake signature that looked nothing like mine. I laughed and told them it was obvious fraud. If they pursued this, they'd be facing jail time. Logan's face turned pale the moment I laid out the consequences for their actions. Fraud, breaking and entering, assault. Each one a potential felony. I told them straight up that I could ruin their lives if I wanted to press charges. And honestly, the only reason I hadn't done so already was because of Logan's kids. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this mess. This is your one and only chance to leave without me calling the cops to haul you all away, I said, my voice firm. My mom, ever the master manipulator, jumped in between us and tried to double down on her guilt trip. You need to do this for Logan, she said, her voice dripping with that condescending sweetness. She even had the nerve to suggest that I should move back into my camper so Logan and his family could have a proper home. That's when I lost it. I shouted back that if she thought it was such a great idea, she could let Logan move into her house instead. I pointed out how absurd it was for them to demand I give up my home just because they felt entitled to it. The police stepped in to separate her from me, and I didn't waste any time. I demanded they all leave immediately or face the full extent of the law. I yelled that drilling out my lock, faking lease papers with a forged signature, and the recorded evidence of Megan's physical attack were all crimes that could put them behind bars. I added that the only reason I hadn't pressed charges yet was out of consideration for the kids. But trust me, I said, that patience is wearing thin. For the first time, my mom seemed to grasp that I wasn't bluffing. She sighed in defeat and said she'd put an end to it. She pulled Megan aside for a whispered conversation while my dad tried to reason with Logan. Megan, of course, immediately began to sob theatrically, tearing up the fake lease papers like they were confetti. One of the officers, clearly unimpressed, told her to pick up every single piece or face a littering citation. Her crocodile tears dried up real fast as she scrambled to gather the scraps. Meanwhile, Logan reluctantly told his kids to start loading their belongings back into the moving truck. The kids were crying, especially the eldest, who was bawling about not getting their own room. Megan cranked up the guilt factor, rubbing her pregnant belly like she was auditioning for a soap opera. "Why can't you just do this for Logan?" she whined, her voice dripping with melodrama. Logan joined in with his best sad puppy expression, pleading, "Please don't do this. We need this house." But I didn't waver. "Keep packing," I told them coldly. Megan and the kids turned their crying up to full volume, and Logan lost his temper. "Are you satisfied with yourself?" he screamed. "You've denied us a home because you're too selfish to share." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. "Share?" I shot back. "You mean take. There's a difference, Logan, and you've never been good at understanding it. You're not my brother anymore. You're just a spoiled, entitled jerk who thinks the world owes him everything." Logan started hurling F-bombs at me, but the cops quickly stepped in and told him to calm down or risk being handcuffed. He backed off, muttering under his breath, but the look on his face was a mix of rage and fear. I asked the officers to stay until my family was completely gone, and thankfully they agreed. In fact, a couple more police cars showed up shortly after, adding to the pressure. My parents, realizing the game was up, finally began to move faster. Logan handed over the keys to the new lock he'd installed on my door, but not without a petty flourish. He threw them into a storm drain. The police weren't having it. They made him retrieve the keys himself, and he ended up filthy and grumbling as he handed them back to me. Before leaving, my mom tried one last desperate tactic. "You'll be disowned for this," she warned, as if that would bother me. I laughed in her face. "Oh no. You mean I won't have to come to holidays where you treat me like crap and make it obvious Logan's your favorite? What a tragedy." I added, "You've treated me so poorly that if Logan ever needed an organ donor, I wouldn't give him a single cell. Now take your own advice and suck it up." My parents were stunned into silence, their faces a mix of anger and humiliation. The cops looked visibly unimpressed with them as well. Confronting your abusive parents in front of police officers is an experience I highly recommend. It forces them to behave, at least temporarily. Megan, meanwhile, threw yet another tantrum on my front lawn. She refused to help pack the truck and just sat there pouting like a child, while Logan and my parents scrambled to load everything back up. My mom kept trying to negotiate, offering increasingly ridiculous deals. Logan can pay rent, she suggested. When I didn't bite, she added, or maybe you could move back in with us and let Logan rent your house. That way, you won't even have to share. I shut her down immediately. I don't want Logan's money, and I definitely don't want to live with him or you ever again. Making a deal with you would be like making a deal with the devil. Hearing that, Megan slammed a box on the ground and started wailing about how she didn't want to go back to living with my parents. But I didn't care. I just wanted them gone. When they finally finished loading the truck, I gave my parents one last piece of my mind. I laid out every single way they had mistreated me growing up and reminded them how they refused to help me when I was homeless. You let Logan and Megan mock me, call me a bum, and now you wanted to kick me out of my own house for them? Who's the bum now? With the cops standing by, they couldn't do anything but stand there and take it. My mom cried, my dad looked ready to explode, and Logan clutched his kids like he'd been mortally wronged. Megan, predictably, was throwing a fit in the back of the moving truck. As they drove away, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. I knew this wasn't the last I'd hear from them, but for now, my house was mine again, and I intended to keep it that way. I stood firm, pointing out how absurd it was for my parents to ask me to gouge myself financially just to park my camper on their property when I was jobless. Yet they were willing to hand my house to Logan for free. The police couldn't hide their judgmental looks, which emboldened me further. I laid it all out for them, asking why I'd always been treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. What had I done to deserve this treatment other than simply existing? I reminded them, loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, that I bought this house with my own hard-earned money. You've made it clear I'll never be anything but a doormat to you, I said, my voice shaking with anger. But those days are over. This house is mine, and you'll get nothing from me again. My mom started sobbing into my dad's jacket, her tears flowing like a cheap melodrama actress. Dad looked furious, his face flushed red, not from guilt, but from embarrassment. Logan, meanwhile, avoided eye contact entirely as he and Megan loaded the last of their belongings back into the truck. I didn't stop there. You've spent years turning a blind eye to Logan's entitlement, enabling him to treat me like garbage. Now you think you can just waltz in here and take what I've worked so hard for? No. You want Logan to have a home so badly? Why don't you give him yours? By the time they were done, Megan sat on the lawn, pouting like a toddler denied candy. She didn't even try to hide her disdain as she glared at me. This isn't over, she yelled before climbing into the van, slamming the door dramatically. I just shook my head. Good riddance, I muttered as their vehicles disappeared down the street. But, of course, that wasn't the end. I updated the rest of the family about what had happened, posting the full story online with all the receipts. This time, my parents couldn't spin their lies to save face. The family, once split, rallied behind me. Even the former flying monkeys who used to enable my parents and Logan came to my defense, seeing the situation for what it really was. It felt like a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As Christmas approached, I decided to host a holiday party for the relatives who had supported me. It was a warm, joyous gathering, a stark contrast to the chaos my immediate family always brought. For once, I felt truly appreciated. Everyone praised how far I'd come, some even apologizing for not stepping in sooner. The music, laughter, and love were everything I'd missed out on for years. But, as you might guess, peace didn't last long. 2 hours into the party, the door swung open without so much as a knock. My parents, Logan, and Megan strolled in as if they owned the place, plastering fake smiles on their faces. Megan's smugness was especially infuriating. Her eyes darted around the room, sizing it up like she still thought she could claim it. I immediately stopped the music, stepping forward to block their path. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my tone ice cold. "Oh, we just came to wish everyone a Merry Christmas," my mom cooed, though her overly sweet tone gave away her true intentions. Logan chimed in, "We thought it'd be nice to spend the holiday together, as a family." I didn't even try to hide my irritation. "You weren't invited," I snapped. "This is my house, and you're not welcome here. Leave." Predictably, Megan started her waterworks, clutching her baby bump like she thought it would earn her sympathy. "Why are you being so cruel?" she whined. "It's Christmas. Can't we all just get along?" Her performance fell flat. The rest of the family, already aware of the backstory, watched in awkward silence. Finally, one of my uncles spoke up. "You weren't invited, and it's clear you're not wanted here. Maybe you should go." Megan shot him a venomous look, but didn't move. Logan, emboldened by his wife's theatrics, stepped closer. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and threatening. "This isn't how family treats each other." That was the last straw. "Don't talk to me about family," I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. "You've never acted like family to me. None of you have. Now get out before I call the police again." My parents looked shocked, as if they hadn't anticipated me standing my ground so firmly. Megan's sobbing grew louder, but even Logan seemed to realize they weren't going to win this battle. With a huff, they turned and left, slamming the door behind them. The party resumed, though the mood was understandably dampened. Still, as the night wore on, the warmth and laughter returned. For once, I felt like I was surrounded by people who truly cared about me, and not just what they could take from me. That night, as I locked up my home, I felt a sense of closure. My parents, Logan, and Megan had lost whatever remaining power they held over me. This house, my sanctuary, was mine, and no one would take it from me. I turned off the music and told them to leave immediately. They claimed they brought gifts and begged to stay, but before I could respond, my uncle, my mother's own brother, stood up. He didn't hold back, telling them they had no right to be in my home or my life after everything they'd done. Several other relatives backed him up. This hit hard because my uncle used to adore my mother until he found out the full extent of how my parents had treated me. Even my grandparents chimed in. As old as they are, they stood firm, telling my parents that if they wanted to make amends, they were going about it the wrong way. They admitted they'd never been more disappointed in my parents and called out their years of favoritism toward Logan. My grandparents told them it was time to make a serious effort to treat me like a son, or they'd never be part of my life again. Then, the family turned their attention to Megan and Logan. My grandparents addressed Megan's endless complaints about needing more space and told her outright to let it go. My house would never become her home. Megan, predictably, broke into tears, throwing herself into yet another pity party. She plopped into a chair and cried about how unfair it was that I had a house all to myself while she, a mother of 4, was forced to live like this. She claimed she just wanted a better place to live so she could feel like a real mom. I couldn't help myself. "A real mom?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the kind who actually parents her kids instead of dumping them on my mom while she sits on her, but drinking and scrolling through her phone all day?" The room went silent, and Megan's face turned red with anger. "Maybe if you got a job and actually saved some money, you wouldn't be stuck living with my parents." Megan's jaw dropped, and she demanded to know if I was calling her a bad mom. I shrugged and replied, "The evidence speaks for itself." Things escalated quickly after that. Megan's eldest, only 7, stormed over and started kicking at my legs, yelling that I was mean for making his mom cry. Logan had to grab his son and pull him away. That's when the rest of the family jumped in, and the whole scene turned into a full-blown intervention. Relatives unleashed years' worth of frustration, tearing into Megan and Logan for their entitlement and behavior. Megan sobbed, her new baby screamed, and even Logan was near tears. He ended up slumping onto the ottoman by the door, completely defeated, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The humiliation was total. Logan's reputation as the golden child was shattered, and my parents looked utterly lost. For the first time, their mask had slipped, and the family saw them for who they really were. After what felt like forever, they finally left. Megan stormed out first, still sniffling, while my parents and Logan quietly followed. Once they were gone, we resumed the party. No one wanted to dwell on what had happened, and the rest of the night was filled with laughter and holiday cheer. Since most of the adults had been drinking, I let everyone stay the night, even offering up the camper for extra space. Many of my relatives couldn't believe I'd lived in it for 2 years. They bombarded me with questions about how I managed during the summers and winters. Christmas morning, I woke up early and had coffee and ibuprofen ready for everyone nursing eggnog hangovers. They complimented me on being a much better host than my parents ever were, and we all agreed to make this a tradition. After Christmas, Megan finally stopped posting passive-aggressive nonsense about me on social media and even deleted her old posts. However, she couldn't resist one last rant, complaining about how she'd tried to convince my parents to buy a camper so Logan and his family could have the entire house. Unsurprisingly, my parents shut that idea down, refusing to give up their home or even their master bedroom. The post only stayed up for a couple of days before Megan deleted it, likely realizing no one cared anymore. Since then, life has been calm. I've even started hosting poker nights with friends. I'm terrible at poker. I can never remember the rules, but it's more about the beer, junk food, and laughs than the game itself. We recently feasted on Whoppers from Burger King, just a group of guys being merry idiots. As for dating, I'm considering giving it a shot this summer. I'm not getting any younger, and it feels like the right time to put myself out there. Fingers crossed it goes well. The camper now sits idle in my backyard, but I sometimes spend time in it. It feels like a second home after everything I've been through. Maybe one day I'll actually take it camping like it was originally meant for. I've never been camping before. My parents always thought it was a waste of time, but it feels like a new experience worth trying.